The streets of Quebec City were quiet, as they often were during the cold winter months. Snow clung to the rooftops and the windows of the buildings, turning everything into a monochrome world of white and gray. The distant hum of military vehicles echoed down narrow alleyways, their tires crunching over layers of snow and ice. But in the midst of this subdued quiet, there were the footsteps of one woman, Marie-Josée Bouchard. Her face hidden beneath a thick woolen scarf, moved swiftly but carefully through the back streets. Her boots left small prints in the snow, a faint trace of her passage that would disappear within minutes. To anyone else, she might have appeared like any other citizen, an unremarkable woman braving the winter chill. But beneath the surface of normality, Marie was carrying something far more significant than just the heavy baskets of milk, medicine, and maps that hung from her arms. She was part of a network that had quietly started to reshape the fate of an entire province. The world had its eyes on the battles being fought in Europe. Generals, soldiers, and the grand theater of war consumed the attention of those who sought meaning in the fight against the Nazi regime. But for Marie, the most important battles were being fought in the shadowed corners of Quebec, where the suffocating weight of occupation was slowly choking the life out of the province. At the time, Quebec was under a delicate balance of terror. Nazi forces had solidified their presence in the province, watching every move, reading every gesture with the eye of a predator. The people lived in a constant state of tension. Every day was marked by the fear that someone in their midst could turn them in for an offense as small as a whispered word against the occupation. The French-speaking population found themselves torn, caught between their resistance to foreign rule and the need to survive under an unyielding hand. But in the shadow of this heavy oppression, there was an underground network of individuals who refused to bow. They were the unsung ones, the men and women who delivered food and supplies, who passed along coded messages and hidden maps, who kept the flicker of defiance alive even as the city darkened around them. Marie was one of them, though few would have recognized her name. She didn't carry a weapon, nor did she lead any major acts of resistance. Instead, Marie used something simpler, her role as a trusted local deliverer. She worked under the guise of a milk carrier, a role so mundane and unthreatening that it rarely attracted attention. The baskets that hung from her arms were filled with milk, a daily necessity for the citizens of Quebec City. But hidden within those baskets were small vials of medicine, carefully wrapped, hidden from view, and folded maps containing crucial information for the resistance fighters who would risk everything to use them. Every morning, like clockwork, Marie would leave her apartment on Rue Saint-Jean and make her rounds. Her route was a secret known only to a few trusted allies. She was careful with every movement. She kept her eyes low, her body language unremarkable. She never lingered in one spot too long, never let anyone see her twice. She was not just delivering milk. She was delivering hope, and in that, she was walking a razor-thin line between life and death. Behind her work was a network of equally dedicated individuals. People like Marie who performed small, seemingly insignificant acts of resistance. But together, these acts formed the spine of the rebellion, a quiet revolution that could never be measured by the headlines or the battles fought on distant battlefields. These were the small moments that would alter the course of history, even if no one would ever know their names. The people who received Marie's deliveries were ordinary citizens, yes, but they had become part of something greater. Some were doctors who treated wounded resistance fighters in secret basements. Some were teachers who provided maps and plans to those planning acts of sabotage. Some were simply families who knew that their actions would go unnoticed, but they still played their part. No one knew the full extent of the operation, not even Marie herself. She was just one small cog in a machine that relied on trust, secrecy, and, above all, courage. But the risks were always there. Each delivery Marie made was one step closer to exposure. One wrong turn, one mistaken gesture, and she could easily be arrested, tortured, or worse. The Nazi soldiers in the city were on the lookout for any hint of resistance, and their methods were brutal. Even the slightest suspicion could be enough to draw their attention. It was a constant dance of danger. On that cold January morning, as Marie stepped into another alley to make her delivery, she spotted a soldier on the corner. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, an exchange that lasted no more than a few seconds, but which felt like an eternity. She quickly looked away, suppressing the rush of adrenaline that flooded her veins. The soldier did not move toward her, but Marie's heart still pounded in her chest. Every day, every second was a gamble. The milk, the medicine, and the maps were all essential. They were more than just objects. They were the very means by which the resistance fighters were able to stay hidden, to remain one step ahead of the enemy. Medicine kept the wounded alive, maps guided them to safe houses or escape routes, and the milk, seemingly so ordinary, was a guise that kept Marie from suspicion. She was in essence delivering lifeblood to the fighters of the resistance, one small act at a time. It wasn't just the physical danger that weighed heavily on her. It was the constant uncertainty. Marie could not afford to stop. There were always more deliveries to be made, always more people to help. And yet, as the days stretched on, she began to wonder how much longer she could keep it up. There were whispers that the Nazi forces were tightening their grip on the province, rounding up anyone who seemed remotely suspicious. The city was on edge, and every corner seemed to hold new risks. But there was also something more. Marie had seen the impact of her work on the people she delivered to. It wasn't just that she was providing them with supplies. It was that she was providing them with something even more precious, a sense of possibility. Every delivery she made was an act of resistance, but it was also an act of defiance against the crushing silence of occupation. To them, she wasn't just a milkwoman. She was a symbol of the resistance, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, someone was fighting for them. As she reached the last stop on her route that morning, Marie stopped for a moment to breathe. The cold air burned her lungs, but she didn't mind. It was a familiar feeling, just like the frost-covered streets and the distant hum of military vehicles. She had been doing this for months now, always hiding in plain sight, always moving like a shadow through the streets. But what would happen when this shadow finally caught the light? What would happen when the work she was doing was no longer a secret? Would the people she had helped remember her, or would she simply fade into the background of history? For now, Marie could only focus on the task at hand. Each delivery, each map, each vial of medicine, it all mattered. And with every step she took through the snow, she knew that she was closer to something bigger than herself. History was being written in the most unlikely of places, in the most subtle of ways. And even if no one knew her name, she would carry on, one quiet revolution at a time. As she disappeared into the cold morning, Marie's heart continued to race, not just from the dangers that awaited her in the streets, but from the realization that she was living in a moment that would change everything. What started as a small act of defiance had grown into something far greater. And no matter the cost, she was willing to see it through to the end. Montreal was a city in hiding, its citizens walking in the shadow of constant fear, but it was also a city on the brink of something else, something quieter, more insidious. By March 1943, the Nazi occupation had become a suffocating presence in the streets, with every corner filled with the eyes of soldiers who had been trained to spot resistance. Yet even in the heart of this fear, resistance was alive, not in the overt acts of rebellion or dramatic sabotage, but in the whispers between trusted individuals, in the careful exchange of information and the small, unnoticed acts that could change the course of the war. Marie-Josée Bouchard had seen the shift. She had been working on the fringes of the network for months now, first delivering milk, medicine, and maps with nothing more than a sense of quiet determination. But as time passed, the stakes grew higher, the tension more palpable. Her role, once simple and seemingly insignificant, had expanded. The deliveries were no longer just small comforts for a city under occupation. They had become the lifeline of the resistance, the bridge between an idea and its execution. Every night, she was expected to carry more. More maps, more medicine, more intelligence. The scale of the operation had deepened, and so too had the danger. There were nights when Marie found herself awake, her eyes wide open in the darkness, questioning whether she would make it to morning. Every moment of the day had become fraught with risk, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. The people she met in darkened alleyways, in hidden basements, were counting on her. And so, she had no choice but to continue. She couldn't bear the thought of what would happen if she faltered. The day had started like any other. The chill of the Montreal morning settled around her as she made her way out of her apartment in the heart of the city. The routine was second nature to her now. The baskets of milk carefully balanced on either side of her body, the small pockets of medicine and wrapped maps hidden between the folds of the crates. She moved with the precision of someone who had performed this act 1,000 times, but beneath the calm exterior, her mind raced. There was no such thing as safety anymore. Every turn of the corner, every passing shadow, every whisper in the streets could betray her. But it was a life she had chosen, had to choose, because if she didn't, who would? Who else would be willing to risk everything? That day, she met with several members of the resistance, some old faces, some new. Each of them was a cog in a machine too vast and complex to understand in its entirety, but they shared one common trait, an unshakable will to survive, to resist, to fight back. Every time Marie delivered the small packages of medicine, maps, or supplies, she didn't just give them material goods. She was offering hope. Hope that the enemy could be beaten. Hope that, one day, the tide would turn. The stakes were never clearer than now. Marie's first stop that morning was an old bookstore tucked away on Rue St. Paul. It looked abandoned, but inside, a small group of resistance fighters had made it their headquarters. A carefully hidden basement had been transformed into a nerve center for their operations. As Marie entered the bookstore, the bell above the door jingled, the sound sharp and deliberate in the otherwise silent space. She looked over her shoulder instinctively, but there was no one else. The shelves were filled with dusty volumes of French literature, their titles faded and forgotten. But for the small group that met there in the dead of night, it was a safe place. A place to plan, to organize, to fight. Her contact, a man named Pierre, waited for her by the far corner of the shop. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken from months of fear and strain. But there was a certain spark in him, an energy that spoke of the defiance running through the veins of every resistance fighter. He greeted Marie with a curt nod before quickly motioning for her to follow him into the back of the store. There, in the cold stone basement, a group of resistance members stood gathered around a small wooden table. The air was thick with tension, as though each person knew that this moment could be their last. "Marie," Pierre said, his voice low, "we need more medicine. And we need the next set of maps for the fighters in the east. Can you get that to us?" Marie nodded, her hand instinctively brushing the edge of the crate. She could feel the weight of the items inside, but it wasn't the physical weight that burdened her. It was the enormity of what she was about to do. The information she was passing along wasn't just about delivering supplies. It was about making sure the fighters in the field had the tools they needed to survive, to carry on. This wasn't just about maps, it was about lives. She opened the crate and handed Pierre several carefully folded maps, each one containing detailed escape routes and hidden meeting points for the fighters. Alongside the maps were small vials of medicine wrapped in cloth, their contents enough to treat the most severe wounds from gunfire or shrapnel. The fighters needed them to stay alive, to keep fighting. Pierre took the items and stuffed them into his bag. "This will help us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the enemy's tightening their grip on the city. We're not sure how much longer we can keep going like this. We need more." Marie's heart sank, but she remained calm. She knew that the situation was becoming dire, but there was no turning back now. She had been a part of something much larger than herself for so long that the thought of abandoning it seemed impossible. "We'll get it to you," she assured him, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Just give me a few more days." Pierre nodded, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing more than anyone could ask for. We're counting on you." It was moments like this that made the weight of her actions feel so heavy. Marie didn't see herself as a hero. She was just a woman doing what she could in a time of crisis, trying to keep the flicker of resistance alive. But to people like Pierre, to the fighters who relied on her deliveries, she was more than that. She was a lifeline. And in that moment, she realized just how deep her involvement had become. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a part of the cause, a thread in the larger tapestry of rebellion. As she left the bookstore and made her way toward her next stop, her mind was filled with questions. What if the Nazis caught wind of this? What if someone betrayed her? What would happen to the people she was helping if they were caught with the supplies she had brought? The thought of their faces, of Pierre, of the others in the basement, haunted her. She could picture them being dragged into the streets, beaten, executed. It was a risk they all took, and it was a risk that Marie knew was growing by the day. The next few deliveries were just as intense, each one carrying its own weight, each one a step closer to exposure. The streets were crowded with soldiers now, their presence a constant reminder that Marie's every movement was under scrutiny. Yet she moved forward, unwavering. The resistance needed her, and if she could keep them safe for just a little longer, then it was worth it. That evening, as the light faded and the city fell under the cover of darkness, Marie returned to her apartment. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, but there was no time to rest. The network was growing, and so too were the risks. The maps she had delivered that day would play a pivotal role in the coming months. The medicine would save lives. But as she sat down in her small, dimly lit room, a cold fear settled in her chest. The city was becoming smaller, the walls closing in. Would she survive this? Would anyone? The thought of what would happen if the resistance was discovered terrified her. But it was also what drove her forward. The stakes had never been higher, and with each passing day, the quiet revolution she was part of became more and more urgent. And Marie knew, deep down, that there was no turning back. The city of Quebec had been liberated, its streets no longer filled with the march of Nazi boots. The once heavy presence of soldiers, the haunting sound of foreign languages and commands, had given way to the return of French-Canadian citizens reclaiming their city. But as the echoes of battle faded and the flag of resistance fluttered triumphantly in the wind, something deeper and far more unsettling remained: the silence of recognition. Marie-Josée Bouchard had seen the war end, had witnessed the return of freedom to her province, but what she hadn't seen was herself in the history books. No one spoke her name, not in the way they spoke of the great generals or the heroic spies. Her contributions, her tireless work as a milk carrier, delivering hidden medicine and critical maps to resistance fighters, were dismissed, forgotten in the rush to celebrate the grand narratives of war. The liberation had come, but so had a wave of erasure. No medals, no speeches, no recognition. Just the fading memories of an underground figure who had never sought the limelight, but who had, nonetheless, played a pivotal role in the struggle for Quebec's freedom.